I don't know what he's doing.
Okay.
So go ahead, Landon. I got the camera on you, bud.
Okay. Well, I want to welcome everybody to our hangout tonight. This has been a series of conversations we've been calling Infinite Progress, where we've taken different worldviews talking about different subjects. If you check the YouTube channel, we've discussed science and education, jurisprudence, ethics, and now we're going to try to talk about tonight music and worldview. I've got kind of a friendship with each of the guys talking tonight. I first met Chris. I think we did a hangout a couple years ago on Eric Hoven's Google Hangout, where we had been talking about some scientific issues. And it was actually when the camera was off, we got to talk a little bit about music and found out that he was a musician. And he's, of course, invited me on quite a few of his hangouts. So I definitely wanted to get him in on this conversation. Met Steve last year at the Academy of Apologetics over in France, and we just happened to sit next to each other and started talking about music. He introduced several bands to me that I've been looking into, and Phil and I have been buddies for close to 20 years. And he actually first noticed me at the gym. I was wearing a band t-shirt that was kind of underground in a niche market that he assumed only a few people would know about. So I'm acquaintances and friends with everybody here through the idea of music. So I'll let each one describe themselves in terms of what their worldview is and their kind of contribution or association with music. So Chris, you can go ahead and start off, bud.
All right. So everyone can hear me?
Yes,
sir.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this hangout, and hello to everybody. I haven't met any of you aside from Landon. So hello, and I look forward to hearing your stories as well. So my worldview, to take the questions one at a time. My worldview is I'm an atheist. I've also self-labeled as an apatheist because sometimes I just don't care about what religion or beliefs somebody has, so long as I can understand and feel from them that they are a contributing member to society in some way, shape, or form, or something like that. Like sometimes it just doesn't matter to me on a day-to-day basis. And my contribution to music. So I'm a bass player. I went to school for music. I have my certificate in jazz performance. I have a 6-string bass on right now. And so this kind of ties into, the bands that I've played with. So this is an Ibanez bass, and I got it at a discounted price because I was recording and touring with a guitar player named Dave Weiner. Now, Dave Weiner is the rhythm guitar player for Steve Vai. And Steve Vai is a well-known shred master. And so I got to write, perform, tour, and record with Dave Weiner. And because he's endorsed by Ibanez, I got this bass at a discounted price. Through Dave Weiner, I got an audition with Steve Vai. So I got to jam with Steve Vai. So I guess that is the highlight of my musical career. It's been downhill since then. I'm just kidding. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
Cool.
Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, okay. So I'm not in any real way a professional artist. I've just done a little gigs here and there. I'm an actual painter. I'm a professional painter. Here's a watercolor painting I'm almost finished with. It's easier just to show what I do than to try to describe it. I'm a photorealist painter, and
nice.
That's what I'm really good at. I'm like the Steve Vai of watercolor. I've always loved music, though. Weird story. When I was a freshman in high school, my dad announced that he didn't love my mom anymore, was going to marry a younger woman, leave the family, and as a consolation prize, he bought me a drum set, which is, his way of saying, sorry, I'm leaving you, but here's some drums. And it actually worked because I loved the drum so much. I could just beat the troubles away. And my mom, she just let me blast away for hours playing the drums. So there's a real therapeutic element to music that I've lived. But I've been a Christian. My worldview is just I'm an evangelical Christian in the classic sense of the word, meaning I go back to the Reformation and I agree with the Lutheran confessions. A big part of my really from a teenager on has been music in the church more than just music in general, although I listen to a lot of bands. I'm 52, so I grew up kind of in the classic rock era, and I still like a lot of that stuff. I still listen to contemporary music. My favorite band now is probably Snarky Puppy. And I took my son to see Steve Vai about 10 years ago. He's 26 now. No, wait a minute. That's about 12 years ago. Oh, that's crazy. It was the most ridiculously loud concert. And Steve Vai, after he came back from the break, he said, "Hey, I was told that we were too loud. Are we too loud?" And of course, it's a bunch of men in the room. No! I was like, yes, please turn it down. I want to hear the instruments because all I heard was the whole time. Okay, so I'm going on a tangent. But I've thought very deeply about the role of art in history and the role of the church and the role of just humanity in general. I mean, that's what I do. I'm an artist. I make paintings. I also have an interesting story in that my music involvement in church was a big part of me not paying attention to theology. I was so interested in just being part of the worship team that I didn't really consider what was being taught from the pulpit. And over the last 5 years, I've really studied theology and decided that I didn't want to be part of a worship team in a modern contemporary church because I just thought there were some issues that were just theologically incorrect or shallow or kind of directing people's attention in a way that I just couldn't agree with. So now my relationship to the church and to music is much different than it was just 3 or 4 years ago. I'm still kind of working some of those things out, I guess, but I still love talking about it to anybody. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. All right, Phil.
All right. Phil Campbell. I guess if we're going to go with music, started playing music about 8 years old. I was a classically trained French horn player. Pursued that for quite a while. Then got into percussion, drumming in particular, and played in all kinds of bands. Had the opportunity to work with Ricky Skaggs at Skaggs Family Records in Hendersonville. Lived out in LA, moved out there, met a lot of people out there. Just played music pretty much my whole life, and I mean that's it. I don't know. Just try to just get better. I don't have a cool Steve Vai story, but you know, met a lot of musicians in Nashville and things like that. Believe it or not, one thing that probably most musicians know, but a lot of people don't know, is that Nashville is called Music City, not Country Music City. Although it is the heartland of country, but it is also so much more, as well as entertainment, film, video games. I mean, they're like, I always compared them to LA, except without all the crap I didn't like about LA. So, you know, people are more personable. They got time for you. In LA, I always felt like everybody, not that they were intentionally rude per se, but it was just everybody's so busy trying to keep their head above water that I feel they don't have time for you. And I don't, some probably intentionally that way. Others, it's just, you know, rent for a 1 bedroom in a decent place, not even a nice place, but a decent place is $1,400. So, you know, 3 dudes, you know, just, it's crazy. But as far as worldview, I'm a Christian in the sense of the Bible. I guess if you wanted to put a term on it, it would be more of a Baptist-costal, but not. I prescribe to the Reformed ideology, but at the same coin, I have witnessed, experienced, and been a part of God's power in the gifts of the Spirit, if you will. I've seen blind babies healed. I've seen it. It's been there. I'm not, crazy Benny Rooster, Benny Hinn, and there's a lot of people who muck it up, but that's kind of where it's at. That's so those two don't always meet in evangelical circles, but I believe if you read the Bible cover to cover, and it's there and it says it, and we can quibble the base about that at another time, but that's my worldview. My one angle would be, I said this a long time ago. I said I want to present a real God to real people and try to be a real Christian. Just be honest, and just I screw up, and He's merciful and gracious. And you'll see my dogs roaming in the background from time to time like sharks. So, my buddy comes in here. That's my buddy Rudy. So, but that's about it. And I'll pass it back to Landon.
All right. Well, thanks, fellas. I definitely love the eclectic group here, and I hope that this will add kind of the variety to the types of conversations. And fellas, here's what I really want to start with. A famous philosopher, Dr. Peter Kreeft. He's been teaching philosophy up at, I believe it's either Boston College or Boston University for about 30 years or so. It was a co-author of.
Landon, can I interrupt you real quick? Can I
Sure.
Can I get my brother in here to try to get him in here?
Yeah.
Okay,
Go
let me
ahead.
try that real quick.
Now, Christopher, I was trying to set you up. There was a couple times where I was the only Christian in some of your hangouts. I was trying to make you the only atheist, but you got a tag team partner here now.
I love everything about it. I need all the help I can get.
If we can get him in here. So, if you'll bear with me just a second. I mean, you can go. I want him to understand the premise, Landon. You can explain it, and then you can re-explain it when Steve gets in. We can do his introduction however you want to do it.
If he's definitely coming in, let's just wait, and I'll just do it all at once.
Yeah, he said send me another one. I just sent him one. Let me try to grab a link and send it to him. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that, guys. I tried to get him in here, but again, I apologize.
Let me ask. All right, go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
I just said I'm bored.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, Chris, did you watch the Jocko documentary on Netflix, man?
I did. So sad.
What did you think about it?
I thought it was tragic.
Really?
I mean,
give me your take on it.
I knew the backstory
Okay.
because I went to school in Philadelphia, and he is originally from like a burb, one of the burbs from, and I can't remember the name of it, but he's from one of the burbs of Philadelphia. So, he just, I thought it was tragic because I thought he was super talented. And I think that, he got messed up with the drugs and the scene, and that was a mess.
Yeah. Now, did you go to Curtis in Philadelphia?
No, I went to University of the Arts.
Okay. Yeah, I watched it. I didn't know much about the backstory, at least kind of fully, other than I had always heard it was kind of a tragic young death.
Mhm.
In that regard, I just didn't know if you liked how they portrayed his progression. Did you like some of the interviews and stuff like that? Did you think they needed to add stuff, or overall, like, what was your take on the documentary, so to speak?
Well, I knew his stuff so well because in school I studied him particularly. Right, he's the first bass player to apply the techniques that he did to electric bass and make electric bass a legitimate jazz instrument. Right,
Pulled the front.
What's out? He ripped the frets out so it sounded like an upright, but he was able to pull off all of this crazy stuff. He was doing like 16th notes very quickly, stuff like. Can anyone hear that?
Yeah.
Barely.
Okay, barely. I could turn up. I'm reluctant to. But stuff like, but he would do stuff like that very quickly. Like,
Yeah.
He was like the first one to nail like 16th notes and stuff like that. Anyway, To answer your question, I'm familiar with his backstory because I studied his stuff so well. And of course, rumors float around when you're in music school about your heroes and their icons when they die young. I thought that documentary was awesome because it provided like sources that I didn't have available previously.
Wow.
In filling in the blanks of this like myth of this hero in, the jazz world, especially the electric bass world.
Wow. That's awesome.
Say that again.
That's a new documentary you're talking about.
Yeah, on Netflix.
Huh, I got to watch that.
It's fantastic.
I was just watching an old Joni Mitchell concert when she had Jocko on bass, Lionel Mays on piano and guitar.
Yeah, Shadows and Light. That Michael Brecker's on saxophone and Don Elias is on percussion and drums, and yeah,
Like around 1980, I think.
Yeah, it was great.
And I just want to say, I want to give you guys free reign. Feel free to talk technically about music, like genuinely. You want to talk about time signatures and chord progressions and movements and notes and things like that. Don't feel like you guys got to hold back. Like I want this to go as deep as you guys take it. That's another reason why I've got you instead of a bunch of philosophers and theologians. I want musicians to talk about this.
Landon, let's just roll. I apologize, dude. I don't know what my brother's doing. 'Tis the story of my life.
All right.
I apologize.
Okay.
That's him. I'm sorry.
Okay. Those brotherly squabbles, I tell
man.
you. All right. Well, guys, like I said, I brought you all in because number one, I've been wanting to talk about music.
Okay, well,
like I said, I've
we'll
been a
get
part
you
of
in
conversations about politics
Just had a
and
guy on here,
ethics
friend of Landon's,
and
who's,
science and education, jurisprudence, and other things. I've never got a chance to be a
agnostic
part of a
atheist
hangout
guy,
about
probably
music.
might wanna-
And what really inspired me, motivated me was I had heard an interview on radio by Dr. Peter Kreeft, who I was talking about earlier, who had written an apologetic work, something similar to
we'll try
this,
to hook it up.
where he basically goes through
Later.
and gives the different arguments for the existence of God. And he lists 20 something of the different arguments. And he goes through the cosmological, which is the argument from cause. He goes through the teleological, the argument from design, the moral argument. And he basically goes the back and forth, what's strong about those arguments, what's the weaknesses of them. And he even talks about what the reaction is. For example, the late Christopher Hitchens had talked about in a debate with Douglas Wilson about how the argument from design, or the teleological argument, is the one argument for him as an atheist that says, where he would say that it made you stop and think. You have to deal with it, so to speak. He said it definitely didn't convince him of becoming a Christian or anything of that, or believing in God, which I think that was one of the arguments that got Anthony Flew to deism, away from pure atheism, if my memory serves me correctly. But it was one of those arguments that you at least have to deal with. But Peter Kreeft said, out of the 20 arguments, without question, this one argument drew the most positive response by nearly double any other argument. And when I say the most positive response, this includes both Christian and non-Christian alike, meaning this was probably the most powerful argument. And it's the argument from aesthetic, or what's termed beauty. And it's a simple syllogism. And the syllogism basically goes, the music of Bach is beautiful, therefore God exists. And he says in this particular book, on page 27, after giving that syllogism, you either see this one or you don't. And that's it. Every other argument, he's got paragraphs and paragraphs and descriptions. That's the only one where he drops the syllogism, says you either get it or you don't, and moves on. And he said that got double the response of every other argument. So fellas, this kind of kicks off our discussion in terms of music and beauty. And the reason I didn't start with the Gregorian chant or the Renaissance lute player is generally most people don't go back any further than the Baroque era in terms of radio stations or satellite radio or things like that. This is generally the foundation of what is music even today. So I definitely don't want to stay in the Baroque era and talking about Bach, but this is the kickoff point. so to speak, in terms of his impact and what it means in terms of music and beauty, both. And so I want to give just a couple build-ups to kind of feed into this, and I'll let you guys do your discussion. In a paper published by Dr. Uwe Simonetto called Bach and Japan, where, of course, it says here, Japan is one of the most secular nations on earth. And of course, this dates from the year 2000. So it is a little bit old, but I'm sure that hasn't changed a whole lot. And in this, Dr. Uwe Simonetto interviews Masaki Suzuki, and he says, "It is impossible to say how many of my performers and listeners will ultimately become Christians. He believes, however, that Bach has already converted tens of thousands of Japanese to the Christian faith." And one other quote by a fellow named O'Hara, he says, the question was asked, what makes Bach so successful among the Japanese? Bach gives us hope when we are afraid. He gives us courage when we despair. He comforts us when we are tired. He makes us pray when we are sad, and he makes us sing when we are full of joy. Perhaps Bach, transcending cultural barriers, has converted more Japanese than any of us dare to imagine. And so here's a couple different feeds coming from different angles, different theological perspectives. But Christopher, we'll start with you. First of all, do you find anything compelling about this argument? Not to say that you're going to profess Christ right now in front of everybody and completely change your worldview, but is this one of those arguments to where you've at least got to stop and deal with in terms of understanding, the role of music and beauty? And this falls into those three transcendental truths: truth, goodness, and beauty. From a Christian worldview, generally, we believe those are all tied together, that there is an objectivity to those because they are attached to the God of the universe in that sense. So Christians would see an objectivity to that. So from your perspective, do you see anything compelling about this argument? Are you surprised it got the best response? And why or why not?
Well, talking about Johann Sebastian Bach, his music is perfect. So, like it's like a Rorschach, right? So a Rorschach. So for Christians, it could be used as as a vehicle to reinforce the beauty, that their definition of beauty. For atheists, it could be used as just like a recognition of amazing talent, which is also, it's also part of the aesthetic response. But I don't find it compelling for the reasons that my understanding of affective responses is so steeped in a secular understanding that really doesn't have anything to do with the philosophical underpinnings of a Christian or evangelical or Calvinist definition of beauty. Like the truth, goodness, and beauty doesn't necessarily have to be true from my perspective. I understand that you said that those are all interwoven. So for me, I don't find it a compelling argument, but I think that it's super interesting, because I think it's interesting for different reasons than maybe you do. I think that it's interesting because the demographic that they studied it on is who they are, and the responses were what they were. I would be super curious to see that same kind of study done on secular people of different nations, to see if it struck them the same way, because Bach is very mathematical and linear. So, I mean, I wonder if that has to do with that culture liking it the way that it does and saying the things that they said about it.
What would you respond to Dr. Kreef's own conviction that he said even from secularists, it was got the most positive response than all of his other arguments? It's not just the Japanese. I just threw that in as an added caveat. Mm-hmm. You got the same thing from Kreef, from other secularists. But why do you think they find it compelling then?
Oh, I think that well, first of all, it's cheeky, right? The music of Bach is beautiful, therefore God exists. It's a little cheeky. So I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for the atheists that rated it as a compelling argument. I just don't necessarily, from my perspective, I think that it's interesting in a way that data about other people's perspectives is interesting, but for me, it's not compelling. I think it's awesome. I mean, keep in mind, I think that music is fantastic. I think that the aesthetic response that you have from music, the affective response, the emotional response that you have from music can feel like nothing else. And it can also enhance other events that are going on that are meant to build community. Or, I mean, anyone here who has played in a band has had experiences in the middle of a song where you're just like, holy cow, this couldn't get better. This feels amazing, right? And people who study the psychology of creativity call that flow. So that flow feeling, I can, hey man,
Better than sex.
if there's a religion of flow, then I'm a flowist.
One quick follow-up, Christopher, and I'll move it on down the line. Is there anything compelling from your point of view of Bach's personal worldview that was expressed in his music? I didn't really get to talk about this in the intro, but Ravi Zacharias, among others, talk about how worldviews are expressed. You've got the theoretical, the existential, and the prescriptive, and that second level is usually expressed through the arts. As you described, and others, I actually had a similar quote to what you just said, Chris. That was awesome, that Bach's music is perfect. Do you think that his personal Lutheran Christian worldview had anything to do with that, or would you just say that he just happened to be a genius?
Well, I would say that he happens to be a genius.
Okay.
Because
so you don't find
I
anything
also
compelling about his personal worldview being reflected in his music?
See, and that's an argument that that would open up the can of worms of the philosophy of music, right? So does an instrumental music composer's intent have to be what's communicated to the listener in order for it to be aesthetic, in order for it to be considered beautiful by the listener? I say no. I say regardless of the composer's intent, the listener can find it beautiful for misinterpreting it, and it's still as valuable. I don't think that music is a language in the same way that verbal language is.
Okay, that's a good take. That's a really good take. All right, Stephen, as the Lutheran in the panel, go ahead and defend your buddy here.
You know, I just watched a couple, maybe 3 different documentaries a few months ago, just going on YouTube and seeing what I could find all about Bach, because I just wanted to learn more. I'm the kind of guy that's grabbing bits and pieces of information from lots of different fields, and classical music is an area where I'm just trying to make up for lost time because I just wasn't paying attention for a long time. And yeah, it's amazing the universal appeal of his music. Everybody seems to agree that his influence in his music and well, there's a lot I could say. I totally get where Chris is coming from, and I can see how it seems like a pretty cohesive way of looking at mankind. And on the other hand, I think it stems partly from this idea that there are certain things we will discount from the get-go. We're going to kind of leave something out of the equation, and now we have this complete picture of how we see life. But that picture starts with the premise that there's certain things we're not gonna consider. And I'm just generalizing here, but because if I try to think of my own worldview, if I were to be either agnostic or even atheist, I could see myself holding that worldview. But I feel like I have to really set aside some other things in order for that to be comfortable. And I'm not comfortable with that. I think that the idea of beauty is something that, especially as a painter, I've thought about it a lot. And when I try to make a painting, besides the ridiculous thing of trying to sell paintings for a living, which I don't recommend to very many people, that's what I have to do. But underneath that practical aspect has been this ongoing thing where I'm trying to convey beauty with a piece of paper and a bunch of colors that I've applied with a paintbrush. I'm trying to convey beauty with the idea that that beauty will be so compelling that part of, I think, everyone's mind that says there is a God is going to be enhanced. That part of their thinking that says, yeah, this just doesn't make sense from a purely physical, mechanical understanding of our existence. There's something more behind beauty, and I believe that something is God. And so I hope that my art contributes to that in a way. And the thing that I've considered a lot also is how even somebody who's not a believer like me, who produces a beautiful piece of art, beautiful piece of music, it touches me in a way that's just so compelling. And I understand there are psychological impulses. I understand there are brain chemicals. There are things happening that can be explained to a certain extent, physiologically, I guess is the way to say it. But I'm just not satisfied with saying that's all there is. It's just something that we sprang from nothing, and we're going to go back to nothing when we die. I think beauty, especially as it's expressed in music and in art in general, is just so compelling. And I think the reason why it isn't compelling as it maybe used to be is because of it's been centuries now of a historical shift, especially in the Western world. There's been a shift away from just the assumption that everything that we see was created by a creator. We've just started in our society with an underlying assumption that's constantly being reinforced. And that assumption is this: well, there isn't really a God, right? Of course not. So let's move on. And I would love it so much if people who are listening to this would say, have I really considered that as carefully as maybe I could have? Because I don't think there is. And I really appreciate having this conversation, because I feel like I live in a world where we're all isolated from each other, and we don't have discussions like this nearly often enough. We have all these other dumb things we talk about, and we're polarized by politics and by all the different social structures. And really, as human beings, I would love it if we had these conversations more often and we thought more deeply about things like that. Where did we actually come from? And is there actually a God? And why is beauty so compelling? Why do we cry at a song? I know there's physiological things behind it, but it just seems like there's even more than that going on.
There are so many. I'm sorry to interrupt. I know that I've already had my turn, but there are so many wonderful theories about the psychology of art that kind of dip into the kinds of questions you were asking. I'm not saying they are the answers, but if you were looking for like an interesting read, I could point you towards a bunch of books that, if you wanted to see a perspective that is just a psychological, physiological theory about why aesthetics work the way that they do, I could point you towards a couple of different references.
If you have the books there, Christopher, you can hold them up to the camera if you like, or if you want to chase them down and mention them online or something, we'll be happy to look at that. Philip, go ahead, bud. You take your shot at this. What is your take as more of a contemporary, even though you find roots in Reformation theology, you don't personally gravitate toward an ecclesiastical style of worship. You've played in more modern worship, church type settings. What do you find about this argument? Do you find it compelling as a reformed, charismatic type of Christian?
Well, I would just argue that guy's premise, just to make that statement, is kind of presumptuous. But it has to do more with just, I think things are subjective. So it's not necessarily from the Christian perspective or anti-Christian perspective. It's just from a pure music perspective. Although I studied Bach, and I think Bach's amazing, I think his argument about even saying that that's beautiful, and I guess in my head is subjective, because I see beauty as subjective, and some find beauty in the macabre, and So I mean, I guess how should I say this? I just
You don't
disagree
have
with
to.
his statement. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. But it's not because I'm saying he's wrong, and it doesn't really have anything to do per se with the Lord or with God or anything like that to argue for or against. From a purely musician standpoint, or um, it's just that's a subjective statement in and of itself. Now, the fact that through that research that those people came to those conclusions and whatever, I would want to know what was the time frame when that was. How long ago was that, Landon? That was proposed.
He had updated the book in, I think, 2012, 2013, because that's when I heard the interview. The original publication of the book was 94, and then he had wrote an updated version of it in, I think, 13 or 14. And he has said over the years, without question, it's got the most positive response. And Christopher, before I give you the chance to hold up those books, one of the things Francis Schaeffer said in his book on art in the Bible, and it's an interesting point that he brings up, is we don't really find the animal kingdom at large outside of humanity creating what we would call works of art for the purpose of the aesthetic, for the idea of awe, for the appreciation of beauty. You may find creatures that will mark territory or do something to draw a mate in or something like that. This is something that's truly unique. So even as an atheist, even if you can explain certain neurological features, how is it that you would explain the development within humans to even want to create beauty? How does something like that derive? And is it possible to create music or other art without your worldview coming through that, even if it's misinterpreted? And I'll give each of you a chance to take a shot at that. But I know, Chris, you had gathered some books, so I'll throw it at you first.
I just have a couple of books here. I think that one of the more interesting ones that I don't have with me is a couple of researchers named Kreitler and Kreitler, and their book is literally called The Psychology of Art. And they have a tension release theory such that it's semi offshoot of Freudian psychology, where pieces of art create tension and release it in such a clever way that that's what causes the aesthetic response. So that's one of them. Another one is, let me see, This Is Your Brain on Music. This guy was a musician and became a neuroscientist.
I'm actually familiar with that.
Yeah, I don't agree with him too much, but it's an interesting read.
What's it called again?
I'm sorry. This Is Your Brain on Music.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with that title.
Mhm.
Can you? What's the general premise, and why do you disagree with it?
He can I put a flag in that and just show my other two books and get back to it?
Sure.
Okay, because I do want to answer it, but it's easier asked than answered. So I only have two more. So The Origins of Music. So this has, let's see, can you see that? The Origins of Music. So this tries to explain from an evolutionary perspective where music, as humans enjoy it, came from. But it's an edited book. So it's the authors aren't authors, they're editors. So each chapter is a different person writing it.
Right.
So it's a compilation. And then lastly, in the realm of philosophy of music, this is a benchmark flagship book. This is called Emotion and Meaning in Music by Leonard Meyer. And he pretty much says that all of the meaning of music comes from the music that surrounds the events you're looking at for meaning. So in other words, it's all about context. It's almost like a linguistic theory where meaning comes from usage and context. And the only usage that you could do in music is music, and the context within you're doing it is also music. So the meaning of music comes from music itself. And I disagree with him too. But these are very interesting books.
Oh, that's great. I see you're
So-
not a man of groupthink, which I appreciate.
Oh, I try not to be. I mean,
Yeah.
depends on what the group is. So
Oh,
anyway,
come
so
on, come on.
I put a flag in something for you, Stephen. You were talking about, you had asked me why I disagreed with the author of that one book. He thinks that there is an evolutionary reason for music, that music is evolutionarily significant. I don't think it is. Right. So even though I think that we evolved as humans, and even though I trust and agree with the science of, evolution, I think that there's a more interesting theory put out by Steven Pinker, who is an evolutionary psychologist, and he believes that music is the strawberry cheesecake of the mind. And by that he means, it's such a clever, he's a linguist, so it's such a clever thing to unpack. In the same sense that there are no such things as strawberry cheesecake trees that we evolved to move towards, strawberry cheesecake has all of the elements that we did evolve to move towards, which has to do with fats, and that's where the creaminess comes from, and the sweetness from the sugars. And so, like, he's just saying that strawberry cheesecake is a melange of things that we have evolved to enjoy, but we did not evolve to enjoy strawberry cheesecake. He uses that analogy for music. Music mimics the prosodic envelope of the human voice, and you can, when you're in certain emotional states, you sound a certain way, and when music mimics the way that sounds, then it can cause a kind of aesthetic emotive response. And but we didn't evolve for that reason. It's just this synthesis of things we did evolve to pay attention to, as a child, paying attention to your mother's voice, or hearing your mother's voice when you're in the womb and how that affects you throughout life. Child-directed talking for the first couple years of life, and then slowly talking to them more and more like adults through development. All of these things affect music. Right. And because music kind of mimics these things, it's emotive when you hear somebody singing, especially popular music, because that's the music that most people listen to. Right. That's why it's called popular music. You have characters that are trying to emote vocally. Well, I mean, how much more like the human voice could you get? And you kind of can't. So anyway, I'm starting to go off on a tangent. Did I kind of answer your question?
Yeah. No, very interesting.
Steve, go ahead if you want to take the next shot at that. Is it possible to create music without expressing a worldview through that?
Well, boy, I think in my own life, I have interpreted other people's music the way I wanted to interpret it. I was actually just trying to find the CD, but I think it's upstairs. There's a composer, pianist from Indonesia. I can't remember his name because it's an unusual spelling that's, not Western at all. And it's called To the Universe. And I don't know anything about this guy. I just bought the record because I listened to it on Bandcamp. I can almost not stop myself from crying in one of the songs, and it's actually based on a bass riff, so it's kind of modern jazz. And so I listened to it, and I am not a super emotional person. I'm not somebody who believes that we should base our beliefs on an emotional experience at all. I think that the firmness of my faith comes from a really firm understanding of the historical clarity of the Christian faith, not because I felt something or didn't feel something. I think those things come and go. Anyway, when I listen to this guy's music, I'm pretty sure he doesn't share the same faith that I do. It might be a coincidence that he does, but I think that's it is irrelevant. I think that music expresses something, and we take it as if you're somebody who doesn't believe in God, but you believe that these are physiological responses, you just enjoy them, and you see it from that viewpoint. from my viewpoint as a Christian, I see it as, yes, there are physiological, that's a hard word to say fast, responses. But I say with Bach, glory to God. He's given us the gift of music, and we can understand it more now than we could 300, 400, 500 years ago. But to me, that still doesn't take the majesty away or the wonder away. So does it express a worldview? That's my answer, and I'm saying it. I'm thinking more about music in a non-lyrical way. Obviously, when somebody starts using lyrics, starts telling stories, saying a belief, then it becomes a lot more obvious. And then, of course, then you have the issue of, well, is he actually giving his worldview in that song, or is he just expressing one of the worldviews? Like he's portraying a character. That's always confusing, and it really bugs me when Christians say, that guy's song comes from the devil. Listen to these words. I'm like, well, he's just expressing a viewpoint. A Christian could have written that. He's just telling the story from the standpoint of somebody who thinks that way. So I think there are two issues. It's how do we view music intrinsically, non-lyrically, and then talking about lyrics is almost a separate issue.
Phil, I'm interested to get your take on this. We've had conversations. Share a little bit about your view of the spiritual nature that is derived from creating music. Some of the similar things that you've spoken to me before, as you said you had studied music, and as you went through the scriptures, you found such a strong spiritual tug. Share that side of it as you answer this question, please.
Well, I guess my answer to that question just is a pretty emphatic no. Your worldview is so much of who you are. So I think anytime if you're a true artist and you're truly creating, you're creating from your soul or your mind, or however you want to, correlate those emotions, mind, whatever, soul. Your worldview is there, whether it's words or not. If you see the world pretty dim, you're probably going to use a lot of minors and diminished chord progressions. But in reference to your question, to what you were saying, I always felt, well, and I know this, that, there is, I believe there's biblical support for, I'm trying to stay away from arguing from a biblical perspective, but I do believe that music is spiritual in its nature. So therefore, it can be manipulated for good or evil, whether or not you are using words or not. But there is a proven scientific angle to the fact of repetitive. They use in in the Hindu religion and things like that, they use mantras, right? And so you chant this mantra over and over and over again. And it basically opens you up to the power of suggestion and just clearing your mind and things like that, emptying your cup, all that stuff. So I think even in churches, to be critical, to call a spade, a lot of churches these days, they repeat the same chorus over and over and over again. And I have some criticisms with that. But as well as like your hip hop music and your rap music, and hence the name trance music. I mean, come on, it's right there. Those do have effects. I mean, I can't sit here and quote you statistics and numbers and things like that. If you give me time, I could probably pull some, scientific journal up or some, peer-reviewed paper. But I just, yeah, I mean, without arguing too much from, the Bible, because that would just be accepting, that everybody prescribes to that, which not everybody does. But but I think even in the world and in other religions and other cultures, that has proven itself out. And I just think that music is powerful for many things. You know, from I'll give you an example. Tool, Danny Carey. Um, I think his grandfather was a 33rd degree Mason, which is an honorary degree, right? And he's big into the occult, which occult means hidden. And he's and this again, he prescribes to a spiritual view of a different sort, so he's more of a cult side, which they do believe in the spirit realm and things like that. He sets his drums up in geographical formations and things like that, and he's also talked about certain drum patterns and things like that, just as well as tribes in Africa. They use drums and drum beats and things like that when they invoke spirits, and when they're I'll call them witch doctors for lack of knowing the actual name, but I mean it's throughout different societies that music is used in that spiritual realm, and it's, I guess, as much as you can prove a spirit, it's been proven, if that makes any sense. And
Sure.
I'll pass it back to you.
Christopher, from your perspective, as he just referenced Danny Carey and a few other, there's other bands out there I'm sure that you're aware of. I heard Maynard James Keenan say in an interview, on the radio, that if you don't believe in some kind of magic, it's going to be difficult to be inspired. What's your take on that? What's your take on how does a pure atheist get inspiration to create beauty? What sort of foundation? So on and so forth. And again, is it possible to create music and not reflect a worldview in that? But, from an atheistic perspective, even people that are non-Christian are appealing to some type of spiritual dimension to create their music. So where do you sit in that?
Okay. So I just want to, so there's kind of three different things that you're talking about there. So there's where atheists get inspiration to make beauty. And then there was a way that, what was the middle question? Because there was 3 points. You had mentioned, it was something that you had said earlier.
Is it possible to create art and not reflect worldview?
Thank you. And then you finished with kind of a different question.
Heck, I'm trying to remember myself. I just think in regards to other people that are non-Christian that are both, I think I just basically rephrased the first one, but putting back on Danny Carey as a non-Christian, saying that he's appealing to a spiritual worldview as inspiration and even motivation for doing what he's doing. So, yeah,
it was the magic quote.
There you go. Yeah. Maynard James Keenan said, if you have to believe in some kind of magic or you won't be inspired. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for walking me through that, by the way. So let's start with the first. Where do atheists get inspiration? So I can only speak for myself. And it might be a little bit unfair. One of the things that I didn't mention is that I also went to graduate school for music therapy. So I have a weird understanding of like music research that most people shouldn't, to put it mildly. So there is a theory of intelligence by Howard Gardner called the multiple intelligence theory. And he first put it forth in a book called Frames of Mind. Unfortunately, these books are upstairs, so I can't go get them. But Howard Gardner, Frames of Mind, he buys into a multiple intelligence theory, one of which has to do with music. And so for the people where that kind of intelligence is more pronounced, they just have a natural and organic incentive and inspiration to create art in a musical sense, right? There's also different kinds. There's spatial temporal, which could be Picasso. There's kinesthetic, which could be Martha Graham. There's, so you pick the art and there's an intelligence for it, as well as the rational stuff. So, and by the way, I'm bumper stickering this just to kind of move through all of these questions. If you want to know more, please look it up. Second question, create art without worldview. This goes into the explanation I gave earlier, right? Regardless of, you can create art with worldview, and that could be your intent. But according to what I had said earlier, that doesn't necessarily mean that that intent is communicated to the listener. So your worldview could not only inspire you with intent to create art, or it could not, but the perceiver, the decoder of what you've encoded, could have a worldview that shapes how they perceive it. So it works both ways. It works both on the encoder and the decoder side of communication, and art is communication.
But can I
on to Matt.
Can I interject something real quick? Now
Please do.
You were talking in regards to the decrypting of the worldview, and I agree with that statement from a lyrical standpoint. But I think let's take the angle of, I'll just use Danny Carey here as the example in his angle. He definitely has a worldview in his prescription of his trade, the plying of his trade, and he doesn't say a single word. So there's that kind of spiritual dynamic to it. I didn't want to necessarily refute what you were saying. It was more or less to add to that. Yes, I agree with the deciphering where they might not necessarily, you mean one thing, but it's written in a certain way, and it can be, if they're having a bad day, it's received as a bad thing, or having a good day, it's received as a good thing.
No matter how big of a fan of drumming you are, I don't think that you could listen to him play and say his drums are set up in a geometric manner. I don't believe that.
Not purely by hearing it, but I guess I'm coming at it from the statement that Maynard made of, the magic side, and that again goes with the spiritual thing of the way he applies his trade. I'm not arguing from a intellectual standpoint that you're going to get a worldview of, hey, this guy believes X or Y. It's more of, I look at him in tandem. You might not be saying something with words, but you could definitely be saying something in a spirit realm. Even if you don't believe in it, it's like, I've never seen Africa with my eyes, or this island that's way out in the ocean. But, it's still there, whether you accept it or not. Mm-hmm. You might stumble upon it at some point, you might not. I just wanted to kind of throw that kind of monkey wrench in the mix there for the dual angle, if you will, from just to throw that in there. Continue. Thank you.
No, cool. I appreciate it. And I love the fact that you brought up the magic quote, because that's the third thing that I wanted to address. So it's like the perfect segue. So as far as magic, I mean, I can't relate to that quote because I don't believe in magic. I don't frame things in those terms.
I think it was more, I think what he meant by that, and I'm familiar with Maynard and Tool and those guys, I think it was more of magic was a generic statement for, a lot of people call it the collective unconscious, that they tap from, and all, that, from, whereas a Christian might say it's divine inspiration, okay? Or someone who's an artist or a musician who isn't necessarily a believer in Christ or a follower of Islam or any specific religion, they would say the collective unconscious. I think that's what Maynard was kind of saying. You got to believe, some kind of magic. I don't think he literally meant magic. Now, he could have, but that goes back to our deciphering it the way you want to decipher it. But I think it was more of a metaphorical application. But I do believe he meant what he meant, maybe not just that specific wording.
Yeah.
Steve, go ahead. You've been quiet for the last little bit. You jump in on that line of questioning, bud.
Yeah, I think it's really common for musicians from all walks of life to believe that music has a supernatural source and that it also has a supernatural effect when it's played. It affects us as we play it. It affects the audience as they receive it. There's a seems to me almost a universal acceptance that there is this vague spiritual aspect to music that almost everybody seems to agree to, which is just interesting. I'm not saying it means one thing one way or the other exactly. It's just something I've noticed. When you talk to or you hear somebody being interviewed and they're asked something at a deeper level about their music or their painting, it's just so common for people to say, it goes back to God. And they always couch that in phrases like, no, I'm not into religion. I'm not talking about church. I don't know. I'm not into the Bible. But I think there's the man upstairs has something to do with this whole big thing. That's just a common thing, which I'm glad that people say that much. And I would hope that people would think about it even more deeply and consider it more carefully. I guess that's the point I would make.
Okay, awesome. Let me move the conversation just a little bit. We can move out of the Baroque era and let's kind of jump a couple hundred years and let's look at a little bit of modern times. And I want to get each of your thoughts of, and Chris, take the gloves off, man, because we're coming at this pretty hard. Why were Christians able to write such beautiful music from the time of Bach and Handel and Vivaldi and Chopin? And why did it completely fall off the hinges at the turn of the century? Chris, you start, and then we'll go to Steve and Phil.
What do you mean by fall off the hinges?
It just seems as though for such prominent musicians and composers that had or expressed a Christian worldview, there seemed to be a prominence of that, both within the church, because as some people have said, Bach's B minor Mass is arguably the greatest piece of music ever written in the history of Western civilization. And I'm getting that from Terry Mattingly had said that. That was written for church services. Even Beethoven's, what was that called? The Missa Solemnis was also written for church services. So there was an investment from churches to express beautiful, worshipful, transcendent music so as to create an environment of worship to bring you into the transcendent, to take you to that other worldly. It fit the look of the cathedral with the architecture was a worldview, a work of art, and it all fit. And that, it quite frankly, has fallen off the hinges, almost negligence in the 20th century. And I'm curious, I just want your guys' different takes. So that's kind of what I mean by that is not only was it popular within the church, but without the church, outside the church, right? Like people that maybe didn't attend church appreciated the work of those gentlemen and what they were creating. That piece of music was both great in and out. So why is it from the 20th century, unless you're in that isolated kind of church service, it's not really appealing to the outside world as much? Just some thoughts on that.
All right, so there's a couple points to kind of unpack that. So there's no denying that Christianity inspired some of the most amazing pieces of art. And that has to do with political and historical events that were happening at the time, and the culture, and where it was pre and post Enlightenment and pre and post anti-Enlightenment Romanticism. It's just like there are so many variables to keep in mind about this, but without a doubt, the statement can be made that Christianity inspired some of the most amazing pieces of art. Some of the most influential composers lived at a time when religion, Christianity, and thought and belief in God was a predominant view. And so, just like anybody who is given money to compose for a specific purpose, they agreed with the purpose and they made music for it, right? So that's one point, right? So Christianity inspired amazing pieces of art. The most amazing composers existed during a time when Christianity was at its height in Europe. 20th century, how that's broken down between those pieces of music being absolutely beautiful and being used for the purposes of use in church, and then being appealing to people that maybe don't go to that church and appreciated by, if there was such a thing as a secular society at the time, but there is now, that really appreciates Bach. Why the music that's popular in churches now isn't popular outside of churches now, how that's broken down, I think has everything to do with capital. I mean, this is a very weird tangent. I'm sorry to have to take it here, but capitalism as it is applied to the music business. Music is rarely being made for inspiration, or at least most of the music that we listen to or that we're exposed to. It's being made for the purpose of sales. And
I'll amen that, because it's bastardized.
It shapes the way music sounds, right? So, I mean, we can go deeper into that, right? So I have an awesome anecdote from earlier today. My fiance and she showed me a piece of music that she listened to on the radio in the morning, Shazammed it, figured out who it was, bought it, played it for me on the way home from work, and then we found him on YouTube, listened to more of his repertoire, and I said, hey, this sounds like this guy, Martin Sexton, right? So we start listening to him, and she's like, I love this. This is amazing. So I think that because the reason why we like them is because they're singer-songwriters that kind of break the mold of what a popular song should be. I think that more of that is needed, because
I agree with that.
Just the way that general music moves forward and what we're listening to and what's on the radio, that is a horror show. But at the same time, the market has made a cottage industry of Christian music. I mean, for people who are Christians and want to listen to specifically Christian music is so much better now than it used to be.
But can I interject? I'm about to get critical of Christian music, and Landon knows where I'm about to go with this. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. You have a sect of Christian musicians who make good art. But unfortunately, and this is a criticism of my own, right? If you can't be honest with your own, you just can't be honest. But the ones that make the great art and who are professing believers, they're too Christian for mainstream and too mainstream for Christendom. And unfortunately, a lot of them never see the light of day. And what maybe you might have heard, Chris, is a drop in the bucket of some of the great music that doesn't even see the light of day, because of my critiques with the church, that they I don't know, they have these hang-ups. They let tradition and things get in the way. I'm just being honest. Landon knows this. He's with me on this in a lot of fronts. Would you concede? Would you agree with that, Landon? He might not even be there, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I'm here. It didn't click. No, I definitely understand where you're coming from. That they're within fundamentalism as far as a segment of Christianity in general. There have been, and again, fellas, I'm not one. I really don't want to give my opinion much on this. I just want to lubricate the conversations. I'm a consumer. I am not a musician, so my opinions on anything is just as a pure consumer. I mean, I collect vinyl or something, jazz on vinyl and things, but that's. I
have a quick.
My wife got me.
I have a quick story actually. So, one of the things that I didn't mention is that as a bass player, I love funk, right? Like, and I just assume that everybody knows that. Like, oh, bass player, he must love funk.
Yep.
I need to be explicit. Used in funk called slap pop. And I've been working on that for the past, I'm 45 years old. I've been working on that for the past 30 years. So I'm good at the slap of the bass. Here's the funny part. Here's what I find to be the most ironic bit about this. I was inspired to play bass because I saw somebody do slap on like some live TV show back in the day, like Solid Gold or, like something crazy, Soul Train or something. So I learned how to play bass. I'm an atheist. Slap bass is born out of like the black churches. So like Larry Graham invented slap pop. You know, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself is the first song to have a slap pop bass line. He is he's a Jehovah's Witness right now. I don't know if that's how he started, but the evangelical black churches is where he learned that technique. He developed it because his mom played organ and he wanted to be both the drummer and the bass player for his mom. So here I am, a white atheist, being inspired and trying to emulate a sound that is obviously spiritual in nature that develops out of the black churches. Right. And I hope I'm not using like inflammatory language. I don't know, like with the culture today. I mean, I'm allowed to say black churches, right?
Yes.
Yeah, in general. Yeah, well, and I think most music historians will concede.
They threw me
that-
out of LA for not being PC enough, so I'm the wrong guy to ask.
Yeah. But they had, I think most music historians will concede that the birth of rock and roll was out of the Southern gospel black churches, that's actually the roots of it. So, I mean, not necessarily just specifically with that bass rendition you're talking about. I think most historians will trace the roots of what was going on. What came out of Memphis and all that was inspired through the roots of Mississippi, Alabama, and those Southern gospel churches. The rhythm.
That's why it's called soul music and rhythm and blues.
Yeah.
Like, it's soul music because, I mean, artists like Aretha Franklin and Otis Redding from Motown had a moral fight within themselves to switch from singing exclusively soul music to singing what everyone around them considered secular music.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Aretha was on Atlanta. She wasn't Motown, was she?
Eventually, yeah. Yeah, eventually.
I watched it.
Most of her collection's not on Motown. You're right.
Yeah. Everybody lumps Motown as all of the 60s, rhythm and blues music, but they were just one of the labels. They were actually the whitest of the black labels.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there were Stax and there's, so.
Muscle Shoals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead, Stephen. You jump in on this. You haven't had a chance to get a crack at this. Go ahead, buddy.
I want to go back to what you were asking was, how did music get to be where it is today, considering that, you could say that the height of, or the pinnacle of Western music took place in a Christian society 400 or 500 years ago, and now it's so much different. And I agree with everything that you guys have said about the effect of commercialization has been devastating. And there's a couple of books I'm working on. This is one that I just happened to pick up, and it goes along with Landon and I were at the Apologetics Academy in France, and week 2 we listened to Dr. Michael Horton talking about the synthesis of Christianity with a lot of other non-Christian ideas and non-Christian religions even. Now they've constantly been brought into the church. And especially in the last 300 years, there has been, in Western culture, there's been a real shift in, what people believe and what's being taught and how people perceive the world. And it's been a shift away from Christianity. That's what made me think of this book. The subtitle is The Eclipse of the Western Religious Tradition. And he's just going through all the different things that have taken place to bring us to the point in history where we are today. And so part of why we don't see music like Bach being prominent is because it's just not the worldview that Western society has anymore. And honestly, it's been going that direction for 200 to 300 years. So this is nothing to be very shocked at. I think there's been actually a small window from the 1970s that is really, I would say, if not come to a close, it's almost come to a close in the last decade. And that is this pop evangelical world, which a component of that has been the Christian music industry, which has been an anomaly. The whole music industry is actually an anomaly. It's pretty recent, and it has had a largely negative effect. And I think we're in an era now where, because of the internet, because of the choices that we have, that you can find music from a million different artists all over the world. And I hope that that's going to be a positive thing. I know it has been in my own life. I do not listen to the radio. I might. I just checked out in Nashville. There's a classical station that my son listens to because that's where he lives. So I've got that on the internet. So I think the access to new forms of music is a really positive development, but there still is this unbelievable, almost a thought control society in America today, where you have to listen to what everyone else listens to. That there's this constant pressure to listen to the groups that everyone else is listening to that is reinforced by a very small group of controlling interests, the corporate interests and the corporate media. And the Christian industry is just one component of that, which is really disgusting. Christianity has always tried to keep itself outside of the secular world, and now we're actually a part of it in a corporate way. The Christian music business is dumb. It's just really dumb. I don't want to go on a tangent. But.
Well, Steve, let me give one follow-up on that. As somebody who attends ecclesiastically based church, who probably plays the types of hymns that are rooted in Bach's compositions, are you of the conviction that what you hear on Sunday morning needs to be radically different from what gets played outside of those walls? And what can a Christian do who, Baroque is not going to make a strong comeback anytime soon. So what can a Christian do to impact the music industry?
Well, I mean, I think those are two questions, because the music industry, man, I would rather say, what can you as a Christian who loves God and loves your neighbor and loves music, what can you do? Make music. Maybe you'll make music because you're playing in clubs and you're composing instrumental avant-garde jazz. Great. God be with you. But now if you're composing music for the worship service, I think that's a separate issue. And I think that's where it's, I was a guy in the worship band. I was playing electric guitar or bass or drums in a pretty big church. And I really, really enjoyed it because we had good friendships. The music was fun. It's honestly very easy to play. But I see the purpose of music in church now differently. And I like hymns. I like the history of the hymns as well as the theology being expressed in those hymns. I love going to church on Sunday, and when we're about to sing the church, I love looking down and seeing when was this tune composed and when were the lyrics composed, and knowing that I'm actually in a small way kind of having a relationship with somebody from 500 years ago. I think that's something that for decades, I was always was a guy in the worship team who was the team player. I wanted to be beneficial in whatever way I could. So I was happy to be on the team. I was happy to play whatever instrument would contribute that Sunday. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this seems really bizarre that we're only doing songs that are written by largely white Americans in the last decade. And yet the church is composed of all of the human race for the past 2,000 years. But we're only using music from other guys, who also happen to have a record deal with a major label. And, by the way, the CCLI is collecting funding on they're collecting licensing fees on all the music that we're performing, because our church pays a monthly fee to that licensing agency.
Isn't that nice? Brother love.
So dumb. And I'm not against paying royalties to artists, but that's all we're doing. We're singing songs that are popular. We would play a song within literally a few months of the record coming out, and we'd be performing it at church. And I'm like, has anybody even considered the possibility that this song is a piece of crap? That this song is just stupid dribble? That there are 1,000 other songs we could be doing that have better theology and they have a history to them? No, we're not. Nobody even brought it up. And when I brought it up, the worship pastors on staff were always like, "That's a good point, Steve." And then they would ignore me. It's like, we're not going to go down that road. This is what we do. This is the modern church today. It's shallow. We're just going to skim across the surface. We're going to put on a show for an hour and a half on Sunday morning. And we got to get people to show up. And we got to keep them showing up. And they like, so
in that case, the music is reflective of a shallow theology. Phil, let me punt it to you. Do you think that Sunday morning, any style of music can be considered worship, whether it be heavy metal, rap, anything. And if there's a difference between music on Sunday morning within the building, how can a Christian musician impact the music culture at large?
Well, I think there's two different roles. I think, from a biblical perspective, since you asked me about that, the Bible says, enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. It's a methodology, if you will, to, proceeding before the throne of God. But here's my take on that, is that Sunday morning is for the believer, and Monday through Saturday is for everyone else. And my goal was, as a musician, was to make great art that a guy like Chris could appreciate. And irrespective, I find it funny that it's always Christian music, right? But you never hear anybody say Christian boxer, Christian baseball player, Christian math teacher, but it's always Christian music. And that's a that infuriates me, because I think if you're a true artist and a musician, and this goes back to the worldview stance, is that I don't believe you take your worldview out. And here's what I mean by that. My last band, my lead singer, bisexual, guitar player, pure atheist, and I'm a believer, and the reason I played music with those guys, there's a couple reasons. One is that I didn't find a whole lot of creatively thinking minded individuals who were of my faith, who were on the level musically and artistically. But beside that is that I wanted to make good music, and we came to an agreement on, I wouldn't ask them to write songs about, Jesus, and they would respect me in the sense that we wouldn't purport a view of, drugs, sex, and my lead singer is a Wiccan, and again bisexual. He wouldn't talk. He wouldn't talk about that, but we would find commonality in our art and make great music in that way. So Sunday morning is for the believer, and that should be pure. Every other thing, as an artist, you should be an artist, and that's my criticism with the church. And I don't really have a criticism for the world, because when you put out crap, it's crap. You can't defend crap. I mean,
Christian crap is crap.
I mean, look, let's be honest. We try to push worship music, something that's for Sunday morning, on a mainstream station, and it's just not, somebody who doesn't prescribe to the Bible or see the world that way. You're arguing from a premise that they don't even accept. So you're never going to reach anybody. But if you can get somebody to acknowledge that, okay, we both think doing good by people is a good stance, then we have a common ground to articulate our points and a commonality. And what I found is all these shows I played with these guys, the one-on-one interaction is where I try to evangelize, proselytize, whatever you want to call it, is I got a chance to go talk to people. I never beat them up with the Bible, but when I was out there, you talk to somebody like a normal person, and you say, yeah, oh, okay, and then you get to know somebody and you talk to them and you get a chance to tell them how you feel about things. And that's just the way I've approached it. And that goes back to my argument with, the church and Christendom. And I hate to keep bashing it, but, anybody who's a pure believer and understands the Bible knows that a lot of what the church has become is not what Christ intended it to be. And we've lost our way in so many. I'm a man without a home. Speaking of myself, I'm too Pentecostal for Baptist, and I'm too Baptist for Pentecostal. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
you know, I don't know, but that's my tangent. I just call crap
Okay.
and art, and I can appreciate somebody who doesn't see the world the way I do or see eternity the way I do. That's not going to change the way I see things, but I can appreciate it. And I think a lot of people, Christians in particular, can't allow themselves to say, you know what, Tool, they totally don't line up with anything I believe in, but those guys are amazing artists, and I can say that and not feel bad about it because the Lord tells us to speak truth, and truth is truth. If somebody's a good player, they're a good player. And
Well, that lets me thank you, Phil, and I can segue to you, Chris, on this one. And this is kind of the last series of questions that I had for everybody to talk about. Is I was in, and it was either Barnes or Books a Million, one of those. And I generally like to go to the music section and look at different books. And there was a book on progressive music, and King's X was mentioned in there in the early '80s. And I remember this quotation. They were very innovative in their creation of, the type of music that they made. And Jerry Cantrell had actually commented, and I think this was around '86 or '87 when he had spoke to the lead singer. And I wish I could reference the book exactly. That's my fault. But he had said, when are you guys going to make another album so that we can have something to steal? And King's X was in that category of Christian musicians. Along with Neil Morse and Spock's Beard and a lot of these other progressive artists during that time. Christopher, to you, are you bothered at all by artists today that would have a very, let's just call it vocal Christian worldview, and they played their music? Do you prefer to listen to musicians that share your worldview? Do you feel there's more of a connection? Does it genuinely, and because you're a musician, I know this is on a deeper level, do you genuinely feel like, kind of like what Phil said, if it's good, I will listen to it and take the lyrical content with a grain of salt? I want each of you to share what types of music you listen to, what you're drawn to, and again, this is modern, okay? I wanted to move away from the classical stuff. Let's get up to modern times, whether it be rock, rap, jazz, whatever the case may be. Each of you kind of weigh in on some of the bands or musicians that you like. Do they share your worldview? Do they not? Are there artists of a different worldview that you enjoy their music for one reason or another? So yeah, Chris, go ahead, bud.
All right. So in this, along the lines of what I said earlier, the anecdote I told about being a white boy atheist wanting to play music inspired and techniques inspired by, black churches. The music that I gravitate towards are people whose religious perspective is in stark contrast to mine. So we'll start with like Stevie Wonder, Prince, Lenny Kravitz, right? So even though not every of their songs talks about God, they have a huge repertoire where every once in a while a song pops up that just makes it clear that they're making the declaration of their faith that is necessary, right? So Stevie Wonder has an awesome, funky, awesome song called Have a Talk with God. So if you haven't heard that song before, please YouTube it. Stevie Wonder, Have a Talk with God. It's astounding.
I love Stevie, man.
Yeah, he's astounding, right? Prince got converted to Jehovah's Witness by Larry Graham, the guy who invented slap bass. Oh, that's what I'm talking about.
Best record ever. Pretty much.
Thank you. So Prince being a Jehovah's Witness, obviously I disagree with him, but he talks about God quite frequently in the latter part of his career. And Lenny Kravitz also talks about Jesus and God in some of his songs. Now, once again, their repertoire is not built around that faith, but they infuse it in enough of their repertoire to make it clear to the listener that that is a faith that they have. So I hope that answers the question. That's the music that I listen to. Martin, so aside from funk, there's also, like I mentioned earlier, the guy Martin Sexton. Martin Sexton is just a singer-songwriter, bluesy guy, and a lot of his songs reference a higher power, God, Jesus specifically. So,
Say his name again.
Martin Sexton.
Singer-songwriter.
He's fantastic. He's so good.
So if I drop the name
look up
Victor Wooten.
Oh yeah. You want to hear some Victor Wooten?
I saw Victor Wooten.
I've met Vic, and that's funny because this relates back to an earlier point that you said, but most of Vic's stuff is instrumental, but he is a believer, and I've met him, and
he has some songs where he sings.
Right, but I mean, it's the majority, like you were saying, the majority of his catalog is instrumental.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to throw Vic out there because you mentioned funk and everything.
Victor Wooten's one of the guys.
I got the Vic.
Victor Wooten built off of the style of slap that Larry Graham made popular, and he made it he just took it on steroids.
Freaking rocket ship.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, Vic, I love Vic. You mentioned that. I'm sitting here thinking a show of hands.
Oh yeah, so it's the difference between like Larry Graham, like, right? So nice and simple. It's funky. It's in the pocket. And then like not Larry Graham, Victor Wooten be like he's doing Bach cello suites in a slap style that's just ridiculous. And then he has the thumb under and the thumb up technique. So it's just like, and he's able to get that like rapid fire machine gun kind of thing going on.
He's got to play with that synth drumatar.
What's his brother's name?
Oh, well, I know his brother Reggie, but I know who you're talking about. Yeah, it's his brother that plays the synth drumatar.
Yeah, Future Man.
That's it. Yeah, I don't know. I forget his real name, but yeah, Future Man. That's it.
Bale Fleck. But it's his brother. That's his other brother.
He's got like 4. His one brother, I saw one of his brothers playing 2 saxophones at the same time at a bar called Third and Lindsay in Nashville. Because Reggie has an open mic every Wednesday, or he did when I lived down there a few years ago. And he played 2 saxophones. This guy kind of looked like Frankenstein. He did, like a black Frankenstein. He's a big, tall guy. But I would not have believed it. And I was like, what? He was playing 2 of them. And Reggie was playing guitar, dude, and he had a handkerchief, on his guitar as like a capo, but he would slide it all around, dude.
I have it right here.
Yeah. I mean, you can go back videos like a long time ago. This cat's been doing it for ever, but Reggie's a master on guitar. But sorry, you play bass. I'm a big Wooten Brothers fan, so I had to just get my little rant in there.
I got you. And so what inspired that is the people whose techniques I emulate and music I try to gravitate towards are people whose positions are radically different than mine. I can't think of anyone I listen to that explicitly makes claims of being atheist or makes fun of religion in any way, shape, or form. Not that that's who I am or what my position is, but I can't think of music where the content is in line with my philosophy of my worldview.
Do you listen to any of like metal bands like Meshuggah or Mastodon or anything like that?
I don't listen to metal. I like instrumental, like really Animals as Leaders is one of my new favorite bands. So they're like a trio, drums and 2 7-string guitar players. And they just shred. Like none of their songs have a meter of 4/4 in it. It's all subdivisions of odd metered stuff. So I don't really listen to metal. To be honest, I don't listen to a lot of music. Okay. I mostly listen to talk radio.
Okay. Yeah, we're kind of similar there.
Me too.
Steve, you take a shot at it, buddy. Do you listen to only music that shares your worldview? Can you listen to
No.
music that's of a different worldview? And, you know, are you inspired by one or the other? Do you connect with people that share your worldview?
It's interesting how much I agree with really what everybody has said here, and I think it points to the wonderful gift of music and how universal it is, and how, you know, it's kind of a cliche. It's the universal language. I don't really think it's a cliche. I think it's true. I think music, when it's at its best, is a sort of glue that can hold humanity together. In fact, I was just telling you about that keyboard player, that jazz guy. There's a record label based out of New York called Moon June Records, and it's just a guy, Leonard. I forgot he's got a Polish last name, and he imports a lot of music from other countries. There's great musicians all over the world that we never hear about, and he has taken it upon himself to bring them into this country. And I'm sure he's not selling a lot of CDs, and he's not, no one's getting rich. But I listened to this recording on Bandcamp, and of course you can listen for free for the rest of your life. But I was unable to feel good about listening to it for free because it was just so good. So I paid for it, and I like getting the physical CDs. I don't like just ordering the download because I never know if my computer's going to crash, and I like having the CD, and I don't mind spending a few more dollars. And I sent an email after the owner of the company sent me an email saying, "Thanks for your order. I'll ship it out next week when I'm back in town." He was somewhere, and when he was responding to my email, and I said, "Oh, by the way, I'm an artist. I don't have a lot of money, but this record was so great, I just had to buy it." And I sent him a link to my painting so he could see I'm not just some nobody. I'm actually a serious artist. And he wrote back and said, "Thank you so much. Music is something to the effect of music is the only thing we can all agree to, or music is the only thing that we can all believe in." And this was all in the middle of this crazy, ridiculous political year we've had for the past year or so. And he said, "I'll send you an extra copy, for free," because he was just we were kind of communicating just in a couple of sentences our love of music, and I just love that. And it's a big one of the things that I do besides being an artist, and I still play a lot. I'm always composing little things and recording things here and there, is I'm a big blogger. I do a lot of writing. I have a blog called The Messed Up Church, and I also contribute to a blog called The Museum of Idolatry. And we're basically trying to expose a lot of the false teaching that's going on in the church. And honestly, a lot of it's depressing because it's so prevalent. And I find a lot of comfort in a lot of the music that I listen to. And it's like my balance to all the bad theology and bad sermons that I review. And a lot of the research that I do, it's necessary, and I do it willingly, but I need to kind of, get myself built up again. So I listen to a lot of instrumental music. Abstract Logics is one of the record labels that I find a lot of good material from them. Moon June Records. And I just found one out of Minneapolis called Shifting Paradigm Records. And they have some just beautiful contemporary jazz being produced. I get so inspired by it. Again, there's no lyrical content. It's not because I share the same belief system. I'm sure some of the people are Christians, and most of them probably aren't. And it just doesn't matter to me because music is just a beautiful gift from God, regardless of who's producing it. So I think I'm answering kind of what we were talking about.
No, you did, Steve. Yeah, and I think it's funny. We just got a contrast. You had Chris talk about he's listening to people that don't share his worldview, and a similar answer that you gave, Steve, as a Christian listening to artists that don't share your worldview. Phil, I punt the line of questioning to you, bud.
Well, as you know, I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan, and obviously Gilmour is a outspoken atheist. But I would say mine's half and half. Okay, and here's what I mean by that. Yep. Here's what I mean by that is that I take a twofold approach. I also produce and engineer and stuff like that as well. So I strip things down on different levels. For enjoyment, I just listen to what I feel like. You know what I mean? If I feel like some '80s new wave, I listen to '80s new wave. Um, but at the same time, I do I do listen to those who share my worldview. Um, not well, I guess, as a believer in I would argue a society that's pretty anti uh, biblical. I do need to listen to that. It's almost like a soldier patting you on the back, especially working with other musicians who don't share my beliefs. I need some encouragement sometimes from guys who've gone before, but I guess, but from a purely enjoyment, it's everything. And well, I'm really, Landon knows this. I'm really anal about my metal music, though. I don't just listen to any metal. I have high standards for my metal, but no, I just listen to what I think's good, and it's for different reasons. I listen to electronica and jazz and metal, and swing and country and bluegrass and Celtic, and I mean just everything. But I listen to it for different reasons. So mine's all over the place. Sometimes I'm listening for pure enjoyment. Sometimes I'm listening for to dissect it. What made the Beatles so great? Nothing they did was complex in its individual pieces, but the way they put things together uh, was great. The Beach Boys, another underrated artist, in my opinion. Um, but yeah, that's me. It's all over the place. But sometimes it's to reinforce my worldview. Sometimes it's because sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. You know, I mean, that's just about as simple as it gets. Most of the time I'm a nut, but sometimes I got to bring it back down to earth.
Yeah. No, that's good. Well, definitely thank you guys for wanting to take part of this. It's been just an honor to have you guys talk and contribute to this. I really didn't have any other line of questioning. If you guys feel a need to address something that maybe wasn't addressed, feel free to do so. But I'm certainly, I think you guys have addressed everything that.
I wanted to ask Chris something,
up.
Landon. I wanted to ask
sure.
Chris something. Chris, you still there, bud?
There he is.
Hey, just as far as do you think? And this is something I've been critical on my side. Would you say that there's not a lot of people that I've ran across who share your worldview that necessarily are that honest about things and opinions, like you were mentioning the music that you listen to, and they have Joe Witness or Gospel Roots or whatever. I've ran across a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot, that won't even admit to those things. And I can make criticisms. It's kind of like if you're an African American, you can criticize African Americans, but somebody else criticize them, they take it wrong or whatever. But I guess my question in a nutshell is that I find it refreshing to hear you give your answer, and I believe it's truthful, obviously. But do you find that there are sometimes people with a bent that can't or won't admit to certain things when they have that atheistic worldview or not a science worldview or whatever you want to call it, whatever they call it,
So you've asked a very interesting question. I'm going to try to bumper sticker this.
That's fine. Yeah, I mean, I know everybody's probably wanting to roll.
I know, but that's such a fun and awesome question. Before I answer it, I would like to also thank you and Steve and for answering your questions as honestly as you do. Right, like I thought this was a very productive, civil conversation. We have disagreements. I didn't hear anybody being disagreeable. So, thank you both for
Yeah,
being
man.
such awesome conversationalists, and thank you, Landon, for asking such awesome questions. So, I'd like to address tribalism,
That's funny.
right?
Yeah.
I think that that is once again, from my perspective,
Yeah.
that is built into our fiber to be tribalistic. It is built into our primitive psychology to take sides, and once taken sides, there's an in-group and there's an out-group, and we all understand that there's in-group, out-group mentality. Another name for that is tribalism. So yes, I do think that within my, because as soon as you self-label, you almost are inching towards tribalism.
Sure.
So I do self-label as an atheist. I'm more upset at atheists that behave badly than non-atheists that behave badly. And I hope that doesn't sound insulting in any way, shape, or form. It's not so much that I expect it of people that aren't atheists, but my tribalism kind of kicks in like, hey man, you're using a label that I use and you're using a really bad argument. Please stop doing that. You make me look bad when that happens. And I don't know if Landon told you, but I used to host a show on YouTube called Meeting of the Minds,
He did.
where I specifically called people onto the show that I disagreed with for the purpose of learning where they're coming from. And it made other atheists furious that I would have conversations with people like whoever, Andrew Rappaport or or Eric Hovind. He wasn't a guest on my show, but I did go to, as Landon mentioned, I went to his hangout, or just people that other atheists didn't like. It was like I wasn't a good tribe member, right? So the very question that you're asking are the exact issues that I had to deal with in paving the path that I followed for the time that I did the show. So, yeah,
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Later.
I was just going to say, even though I self-label as atheist, the bottom line is I'm more interested in learning about other people. So in that sense, that's where my apathyism comes in. I'm apathetic towards your belief. If your belief compels you to proselytize to me, I consider it a compliment because you care about me enough to do that. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think that that's another thing that other atheists will be really hard pressed to admit to. I see where you're coming from, to the point where even though you're doing something that I wouldn't do and that I don't necessarily prefer, I see that it, from your perspective, is the most kind and compassionate thing you could do for me, considering how much you're concerned for me. Right. So,
No,
and we can go into
that's well. I mean, that's completely well articulated. My brother, staunch atheist. I love him. I mean, he's my greatest ally, but my most fierce adversary. And no, I mean that's I'm with you, man. I want to come across as somebody who's listening to you, whether or not we see the world the same. I it go back to my band. I wanted those guys to know, even though I disagree with, the homosexual lifestyle, that doesn't mean I don't love you or you're not my friend or I'm going to treat you any different. I'm going to share my thoughts and you're welcome to share your thoughts. I mean, that's civil discourse, right? I mean, hence the keyword civil discourse.
Yeah, but people have lost that. I mean, especially, I will spend 1 minute on this. I promise. I won't take up a lot of time. But online, I think that it is made is a petri dish for activists, and for those of us that want civil discourse with level-headedness and an ability for people to talk without too much overlapping talking or too much interruption. I think that is a small percentage of the pie of what people go online to do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, my thing is I come from a background of, we'll say hard knocks for lack of a better, explanation. But I always found that, nobody would ever say to you in person what they'll slander you with online. And it's just, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, man. I think we're all doing everybody a service by doing this, just sharing our perspective. Because even amongst believers, we don't see things eye to eye, and I'm the biggest critic of the church and what's going on. I mean, but at the same time, just like my brother, he's my brother. I love him, but we see the world different.
I want to tag something on to what you both have just said, and that is the misuse of the word liberal.
Oh, classical liberal. You gonna bust that out?
Yeah, I'm this idea that we have two choices in America today. You can either be a liberal or you can be a conservative, and they're both ridiculous caricatures. They're
I thought
not
it was
even
a bigot and a xenophobe. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry.
Yeah, and I live in right next to Madison, Wisconsin, which has got a more liberal reputation than most of the other Midwestern cities, and the anger and the narrow-mindedness that sometimes comes from somebody who claims to be liberal is just bizarre. It's incoherent. Wait a minute, that's not liberal. You're saying that you don't want to hear my point of view because you've automatically made a bunch of decisions about who I am based on a caricature of me that you haven't taken the time to figure out if it's true or not. So you're not a liberal. You're actually being you're giving liberalism a really bad name. I would
two things. Oh, go ahead. Keep going, Stevens. Keep going.
I don't know. I'm on a roll.
No, yeah, that's what I want you to keep going.
I would love to be known as a liberal in the sense that the actual meaning is that you give people the benefit of the doubt. You're going to be generous with them. If I give you a liberal portion of food, I'm giving you a lot of food. I'm saying, here, have as much as you want. But that's not what it means anymore. And what I would love to see is more people who are actual liberals say to the rest of the people, stop it. You're giving us real liberals a bad name. Because you're totally twisting the meaning of the word so that it doesn't even mean anything that it originally meant. And conservatives are just as bad, if not worse, because a conservative used to mean you're in favor of small government and that you would let the free market do more to, give people a fair share. And now the Republican Party has, combined with corporate interests, and the government has gotten bigger than it ever has. So it's like, well, that's not conservative anymore. Stop using the word. Come up with a new word, but at least be honest about it. Anyway, now I'm on a different topic, but yeah. So I think what we're doing here is we're demonstrating the actual liberalism that is so rare nowadays. And of course, if you really believe something, you will say to your opponent, I care enough to tell you why I think your viewpoint is wrong. And it doesn't mean I hate you. It actually means the opposite. It means that I care about what I believe, and I really do believe it. But boy, the comment about tribalism, it's in the church, big time.
Oh yeah.
And many of the big evangelical churches are run by egomaniacs who inspire people to be part of their tribe so that they can increase the size of the church and they can increase their paychecks, and they don't care about the fact that they're turning the individual congregants into little bigots in a way, who think that they're the only ones who have ever understood Christianity correctly because their pastor says so. Oh,
hey, Little
Okay,
Bigot.
so-
That sounds like a good name for a band. The Little Bigots.
Hey, well, Chris, I know you was about to jump in.
that's right. I could.
Before you jump in real quick, actually, Negation of P, which I think is another fellow you're aware of.
Oh, yeah.
He's invited me on his show several times too, and we've actually talked over the phone off the air and everything, we've become pretty good buddies. And he corroborates exactly what you just said. He says his shows, where it's kind of this vitriolic caricature slam religion posts, get like 30,000 views. But when he sits down and has an honest exchange where each person gets equal amount to talk and they each are actually trying to understand, it's like 1,000 and that's it. And he, much, I guess, similar to your frustration, was the same thing. He got tired of the community within that was kind of just demanding this
Poison.
this over the top caricature, slander, whatever kind of thing. So I just wanted to throw that out there to kind of corroborate what you're saying. Like, you're not alone. And you know, I loved it when you invited me on your show. I loved your show, man. I kind of missed it, to be honest. Like, you did a good job moderating, and you always had good people on. But yeah, there's another fella that is kind of sharing your sentiment and your worldview a little bit.
Oh yeah, well Ned's a good guy. Ned and I have had many hangouts in the past, and yeah, love Ned, love him. But the 2 points that I wanted to bring up while Stephen was talking, or let me rephrase that, the 2 points that while Stephen was talking were brought up to me, was he's talking about the whole straw manning thing, which is part of the tribalism component, right? So it's like, you know, either you're this or you're that. Well, guess what? I reserve the right to be way more complex than that, right? So to use your example, Stephen, I might be a social conservative or a social liberal and an economic or fiscal conservative or liberal. You know, they don't have to match depending on the topic. I'm allowed to be that guy. I'm allowed to be a good guy that sometimes fucks up. Right? That doesn't make me. Oh, am I allowed to use that language?
It's America. You can say what you want.
All right.
Hold on. Can we still? I don't know.
I'll tone it down. I hope I didn't trigger anybody.
Are we allowed to be
I hope I didn't
human?
trigger anybody.
I don't know. My face is melting.
So that is a component of tribalism, and I wish that people could be mindful enough more frequently to realize that regardless of labels, the individual that you're talking to is an individual. And that as common as people are, or as many commonalities as people have, right? As many threads of continuity that make us human, there are, we're still individuals. So 2 people, 4 people, 100 people that might self-label the same way, if you ask them pointed questions about specific topics, you might come away with 100 different answers. That's that connection, that wanting to listen to people empathically, compassionately, principle of charitability, benefit of the doubt, civility, disagreeing without being disagreeable, that's lacking. And it's because it doesn't score points. Okay, yeah. So it's the take-home point of this is, it's for, I'm going to sound elitist right now, but for those of us that do want the examined life, we have more of an eye towards it. It is actually an option on our palette in a way that people who move through life non-examined don't. It's not an option for them because they've never heard about it or sought it.
I think it's humility. I mean, I think it's humility too. You know, bottom line, you got to be humble to put yourself out there, you know, and around people who don't see things the way you do, and you might get battered from all sides, but that's okay, because, you know, I mean, it's furtherment. It's the furtherment of knowledge and understanding and getting rid of misconceptions. And I just, you know, it's a breath of fresh air. It's good, man. I'm pretty hardcore. You know, I see things black and white. You know, that's just kind of guy I am. But it's nice to learn the gray area in civil exchange. you know? I mean, because I am hardcore on the way I see things. But, you know, I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know how to articulate that any better. I mean, I am who I am. I'm dogmatic about a lot, but I heard a preacher say one time, and this was the best thing. Landon's probably heard me say this 100 times to him, and it literally changed my life. He said, "If we can let God be God, then we can let people be people." I mean, how profound is that? I mean, that's
Yeah.
profound to me. That's profound to me. I don't know if it is you, but it was awesome. So, just gonna drop that right there.
Well, like I said, fellas, I didn't have really anything else. I know we could all probably talk about any number of things, but
Yeah, we should do this again.
If there was anything else within the realm of worldview and music that you can think of, like I said, you can bring it up now, or we can bring this thing to a close. And like I said, I can't thank you guys enough. You made a great group. You made a great conversation. You all had enough differences amongst you that it made it interesting. At least it was to me. I learned something. And again, as the non-musician here, I was glad to hear that exchange. So, thank you guys.
Hey, Chris, I do want to say this because Landon had brought this up. I do want to edit it, but I'm not going to edit it in the regards of any kind of spin or anything. I just want to take out like the foolishness at the beginning and all that stuff. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I just want to keep everything, straight up. I'm not a spin doctor. It's going to be what it is, but I just want to clean it up. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I wouldn't have come in here if I thought that there was some shenanigans going on. I trust Landon. I trust you guys. We had a great conversation for the past couple of hours. I have no doubt that you will represent it the way it needs to be represented.
It's going to be, it's going to be what it is. So I just want, you know how it is, dude. You don't want to, hold on, let me call my brother, and then you see a big screen come up and all that. So.
No.
Thanks again, Chris. I know I tried to set this thing up almost a year ago, and it fell through communication issues. Again, buddy, it was a pleasure having you on, man. I really enjoyed it, man.
This was great. And if you wanted to follow through with doing something like this again, there's also a body of work called The Anthropology of Music that also connects why music is considered so spiritual, right? So they follow rhythm being the most primitive part of music, how that was used ritualistically, and how it kind of developed through what we consider like the history of religion, from animism all the way up to the more sophisticated versions. So
interesting.
From an evolutionary perspective.
Certainly. Would you guys want to have another type of discussion revolved around this, a part 2? Was there anything that you think we need to develop more or spend time on?
You know what I would like to do, Landon? I would actually like to get my brother on here, get him set up. He told me that he was having issues with some kind of driver or something, and I just told him, never mind. We're rolling, so gotta go. That's my black and white side. Hey, train's leaving, son. I'm out. But I would like to get him in, and have him in here with Chris and Steven if he wants to come, whoever, and just literally, I think it would be great to just have some kind of, I don't want to say open forum, but just if anybody's got points and counterpoints, because I know my brother's going to bring he's not as gracious as you are in a lot of ways, Chris, but he is a gracious guy. You know what I mean? Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's because I'm his little brother, and he just likes to try to.
No, he talks to me, but he talks to me very civil. I can attest to that.
Oh, it is.
Yeah,
it is just me.
Yeah.
He
and I have had he and I have had 2-hour conversations and stuff in the past, and your brother's perfectly gracious to me. So
I'm glad you told me that. Now I'm going to hammer him down.
Yeah, I guess you can, but
Hey guys, I'm gonna go. I would be interested in doing something again if it works out. That'd be great,
Awesome,
Okay.
Steven. Nice to meet you, man.
Have a great
Yeah.
night, Stephen.
guys.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Talk to you later, buddy.
See you, bud.
But yeah, if you guys wanted to organize anything in the future, just let me know. I mean, even if it doesn't have to do with music specifically, I don't know how interesting of a guest I will be because I'm not a hardline atheist. But if you ever wanted the kind of viewpoint that I've demonstrated and told you about,
Yes, I would.
No.
Landon, I would. I would.
Yeah. No, it's
You're a counterpoint to my brother. I'm
Yeah.
black and white. My brother's pretty dogmatic and black and white. Although he's been civil to Landon, he's not always civil to me, but he's civil to
but you're
Landon.
his brother.
That's
what
right.
difference
Yeah.
does it make?
Yeah, you know.
You gotta bust your chops.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've busted his chops in more ways than one. But
I will say this though, in another aspect, Chris, even if you're not, the Peter Boghossian, Richard Dawkins type, you're still not a Christian for reasons, and you're able to articulate those reasons as graciously as any. So even your criticisms are, as valid as any other atheist.
they're
You-
welcome,
you're just,
man.
yeah.
Just
That-
let me
that's
know.
why
Give
I
me some
appreciate.
heads ups. Heads
Yeah.
ups. Heads up. What's the plural of a heads up?
I think that was it. Just the
Heads
heads up. Yeah.
Okay.
I like
I'm
to
not a
say
linguist, no.
that it's up us.
I like it.
All right, guys, I'm melting in this room, dude. So
Okay.
my freaking ears. Can you see my ears? How red they are?
Yeah, man.
All right. Everybody have an awesome night. Thank you very much for hosting. And anytime, just reach out. You guys have my contact information.
Yes,
Awesome.
sir.
Thank you, buddy.
All right, Chris. See you
Have
later.
an awesome. Take care.
See you, man.
Let me stop this
All right, bud.
recording real quick. Hold on.